When I was young, I remember hearing about Dungeons and Dragons, mostly spoken about in hushed tones, a tool of the devil. I recall some vague anecdotes about people going crazy and killing each other in sewer tunnels. I don't, though, ever recall a coherent explanation of how D&D was used by Satan. I mean, I got the whole Ouija board thing. Those madmen at Parker Brothers had mass-produced a tool with the explicit claim of communicating with spirits. But despite both Ouija boards and D&D ostensibly sharing the same aisle at Kmart, they felt like different propositions, and yet many had no trouble identifying the diverse shapes of the devil's tools, as seen in this Christian music video I grew up watching as a child.
Horoscope signs, a Ouija board, and Dungeons and Dragons games set on the table.
We didn't recognize it at the time, but the American evangelical world of the 80s was blindly feeling its way through the labyrinthine era that would come to be known as the Satanic Panic. This era would be driven primarily by a lack of information, but would also be fueled by lies, misinformation, bad actors, confused actors, and one actor whose first leading man role would cement an urban legend that bled into our fears in the 1980s, that the devil was alive and well and living in America. This is part of a series of visual essays focusing on peculiar films, either largely forgotten or on the bizarre periphery of film history. The Satanic Panic is one of the richest and most fascinating topics of recent history because there's so many possible avenues to pursue and so many interlinking chains of causality. There are things outside of pop culture art to examine, like the Jesus Freak movement of the 60s, which tried to co-opt the cool vibe of the hippies, but ultimately settled on leaders like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, who both dictated opinions and became cozy with Republican political leaders. Then there are the news stories that became cultural sensations, like Michelle Remembers, which was a non-fiction book that turned out to be fictitious, about satanic ritual childhood abuse written by a Canadian psychiatrist who claimed his patient Michelle was able to recover repressed memories through hypnosis. These memories involved blood-covered satanic rituals and human sacrifice. This led to many others believing they had recovered memories of similar examples of theatrical ritualistic murders. But Michelle Remembers was preceded by Mike Warnke's entirely debunked 1972 memoir, The Satan Seller, which purported to be a recording of his experience being a Satan worshiper who participated in orgies, blood-covered ritual, and, as always, sexual assault. These claims were debunked decades later by intrepid reporting from the Christian magazine Cornerstone, which found that during the time he alleged he was a long-haired high priest of Satan with a coterie of sex servants living with him, he was actually just a short-haired dude who his friends described at the time as square. And he did not, in fact, attend any satanic rituals with Charles Manson, as Manson was in federal prison during the time frame that Warnke claimed the two had hung out. By the time the Cornerstone article had come out, Warnke had already pivoted to being a Christian stand-up comedian.
Try and imagine this face under one of them crew cuts so short you got a bald spot right there that you don't even deserve, okay? Think about it, man. I know I'm a weird person.
A lot of these fears were inflamed even further with rock music. Much of the rock music from the 70s demonstrated its renunciation of the lame optimism of the 1960s peace and love. The Rolling Stones explored darker themes, and the notorious events at the Altamont concert, which was captured indelibly by the Maysles brothers and editor Charlotte Zwerin, stamped a freeze frame on the end of the hope of the 1960s youthful optimism. This shot feels like a cinematic rebuke to the most important freeze frame in film history, which is at the end of Truffaut's 400 Blows. A shot that freezes in time the ebullient climax of our young Antoine's rebellion. At the end of the film, he's finally able to reach the shoreline he's never before seen. The metaphor of endless opportunity could now be read as the precise opposite, the shoreline now being the limit. And that rebellious spirit, which may have been liberating initially, may just lead to dark excess and death. Distorted guitars were no longer an insistent enough rejection of polite society. Heavy metal upped the ante with intentionally satanic imagery. And while much of heavy metal's content was designed to intentionally needle those who wore their pearls for clutching, a remarkable amount of musical content decried by fearful Christians at the time were songs that simply used poetic imagery. The lack of interpretive literacy led to a literalism that could not recognize words as metaphors for things, as opposed to songs worshiping the Dark Lord.
Songs allow a person to put their own imagination, experiences, and dreams into the lyrics. People can interpret it many ways. Ms. Gore was looking for sadomasochism and bondage, and she found it. Someone looking for surgical references would have found it as well.
Yeah,
Alarmed Christian organizations fought back by creating their own charmingly naive films to be shown to youth groups and arm concerned parents, like 1982's Rock, It's Your Decision.
How many of you are going to go out and shoot up with some heroin or smoke a joint? If you're shocked by these questions, maybe you should take a close look at the music you've been listening to. You've got your demons, you've got desires, I've got a few of my own. I've been searching for the daughter of the devil himself.
Instead of having access to diverse communities that could workshop the dangers of Saturday morning cartoons, there was a top-down influence of the small handful of Christian leaders, all of whom seemed to trust the other's initial gut feeling about how Satan was optimizing pop culture to mislead our young.
Saturday morning cartoons are not what they used to be. Today's generation sees an abundance of occultic symbols. The Thundercats get their power from a magic sword called the Sword of Omen. Expert on occultic influences in cartoons explains.
A mother was talking to me about driving down the road in her car and listening to a preacher on the radio, and he prayed, "Our Lord God, the master of the universe." And a little boy jumped from the backseat of the car and said, "Mommy, God is the master of the universe. He-Man is."
No longer using the powerful tool of backmasking rock songs, now the devil used subtle themes in our cartoons. Many of Satan's strategies were identified, but since these fears were lensed through a distinctly Americanized version of Christianity, little time was given expressing other concerns, such as the increasing consumeristically driven cartoons springing up which were designed to sell toys. The 1970s also provided a fertile ground for films with hyper-literalized satanic fears. The chicken or egg question of whether it was the films that influenced the cultural fears, or vice versa, were rendered moot by box office earnings. One of the hottest directors of the American movie brats was William Friedkin, hot off The French Connection. The Exorcist reportedly revived what at the time was a rarely used and arcane ritual of the Catholic Church. What was once an obscure rite suddenly became revived into Main Street with reports of demon possession suddenly going through the roof, a trend that has not entirely tapered off today. Notably, many of the purported real-life possessions seem to mirror the behavior, tone, and imagery established by the film, most of which were invented by Friedkin because they provided scary imagery. The claim that William Peter Blatty based his novel off of real-life events only heightened the lore of the film. It has remained a common trope in movies about exorcism ever since then. At the same time as this, Ed and Lorraine Warren were trying to make a name for themselves as paranormal investigators. Bizarre hucksters that they were, their fabricated stories permeated both popular culture and Christian lore. Once again, a lack of access to information to cross-reference their brazen claims made it difficult to out them as at least exaggerators, if not outright conmen. And of course, the Warrens themselves have had their vehemently disputed claims of involvements in hauntings and paranormal events canonized in the ever-expanding Conjuring universe, initially established by savvy horror director James Wan in 2013. Some of these movies are top-tier examples of their genre, but also perpetuate the problematic claims of the Warrens. Most notably the third Conjuring movie.
Something terrible happened here.
Which adapted a real-life murder case in which the Warrens, attention seekers that they were, inserted themselves into the case, muddying up the waters of the legal proceedings. The real case revolved around terrifying implications of mental health, as does the original murder case that prompted the events of Amityville, as does nearly every court case involving claims of demonic possession. But yet again, this film posits the Warrens as all-American, virtuous heroes, ultimately distorting the reality of horribly tragic events that have living victims and survivors to this day that have to live with the actual consequences all these years later of what happens when someone with mental health problems enacts violence. This brings us to 1982's Mazes and Monsters. It opens in medias res with police and report that something has gone terribly wrong, alluding to a victim.
Look, we heard a game of mazes and monsters got a little out of hand over at the university.
What exactly happened here, and what sort of demonic forces have been at work?
The apparent disappearance of a Grant University student, the victim of a seemingly innocent game, Mazes and Monsters.
The opening promises to reveal the secrets.
Whatever may happen, where the road may bend.
Oof. Okay. Might not have expected this to be the tone set by the intro credits.
We are our special friends.
Oh, okay. Man, for a movie purporting to be aware of mental health issues, maybe they shouldn't have chosen such a triggering song. Might pop this down at the bottom of the screen. Man, it's the kind of song that makes me want to go watch Von Trier's Dancer in the Dark to cheer myself up.
The choir is so quiet and no one takes a spin.
So let's back up here. What's the deal with this Rona Jaffe's Mazes and Monsters? Jaffe was a best-selling novelist who also wrote cultural pieces for Cosmo in the 1960s. Her first novel, The Best of Everything, was a bit of a breakout hit. Cultural critic Camille Paglia pointed out in a New York Times quote, "The novel and the pre-planned film adaptation presaged Sex in the City."
This is a story of the female jungle, of the girls who didn't marry at 20, and of the men who wanted them, but not as wives.
Career gals in their 20s dating men doesn't really appear to be a revolutionary concept, but this interview clip from the CDC with Jaffe in 1958 about her book is revealing about the chasm of cultural norms between then and now.
You must be in a rather tough position at the age of 26, single. You want to get married, but you've written a penetrating book. Now, you're faced, obviously, with an important and interesting career. Are you willing to forsake it for marriage?
I don't think I'd have to.
It would be over 20 years later that she would write Mazes and Monsters, at which point she would still be badgered about being single.
Now, Rona Jaffe is still Ms. Rona Jaffe.
Yeah.
Is it by choice you did not find Mr. Right, or you needed that aloneness in our generation era to have the independence to write?
Maybe 100 years ago you had to do that. But I certainly knew enough people who were doing both.
Really?
Yeah, there were people. I mean, it was awfully hard.
Yeah.
It makes sense that CBS would adapt her novel as a movie of the week, made-for-TV movies that were often adapted from books and often dealt with trending social issues.
In My Sweet Charlie, an unwanted pregnant girl discovers an abandoned house and an unexpected house guest. Two outcasts, haunted by prejudice and mistrust.
That daddy of yours kicked you out, didn't he?
I hate you!
Most were pretty disposable.
I've always had bad luck with all the broads I went out with and all the broads I married, including your mother.
But a few gained some cultural purchase.
This is a story about two men. They competed for the same job. One was white, the other black.
Of course, Duel launched Spielberg's film career at age 25, though he had been directing in TV since he was 23. But generally, these movies were filmed fast and cheap, like TV shows would be at the time.
They just gave us some tickets and $50 fine, and that was that. And now, it's on my record as a sex offense.
And Mazes and Monsters is no different. The telltale signs of generally flat lighting, cheap sets, an abundance of pragmatic medium shots with little variation or creativity. These are the things that don't necessarily announce themselves to the viewer, but are felt in aggregate. Notice the very sitcom-like establishing shot of their dorm, which is repeated throughout the film. Not precisely, but in a way that feels like they could have captured all those shots in one night with a locked-off camera that simply tilts. After the credits, the film dutifully marches out the main characters in sequence one by one, signaling to us that the characters each have their own unique problems to deal with, despite the fact that these conflicts can all be boiled down to, in essence, each of them being in conflict with their parents' expectations of them. Our first character, JJ, has a propensity for wearing ludicrous hats and is apparently a 16-year-old college sophomore, a fact that is never clearly communicated except for in a quick throwaway line a third of the way into the movie.
Well, can you imagine what it must be like to be 16 and a sophomore?
This appears to be a vestigial remnant from the book that plays little role in the movie, but does reflect real-life Jaffe's college experience.
As I recall, 19 when you graduated.
It was very much what JJ did, which was to be the instigator of parties and all the wild things.
JJ returns home to what is likely the Upper East Side of New York. His mother is kind, but is presented as sort of a vapid social debutante.
Oh, where are you going?
To the French consulate for cocktails, then to a new place in Soho for dinner, got rave reviews.
Who frequently performs extreme thematic renovations to his room without asking permission.
What have you done?
JJ is hurt that she then sachets away to another cultural event without asking him about how his semester was.
Actually, Mother, college was fine.
Tough beat, buddy. JJ is played by actor Chris Makepeace, who I think is a dead ringer for Beverly Hills 90210's Jason Priestley. I think the comparison is apt in other ways, as Makepeace had a pretty decent career going as a young adult actor, but, like Priestley after him, wasn't quite able to smuggle his film career with him as he transitioned into adulthood. A couple of years before this, he had a smaller role in the Bill Murray vehicle Meatballs, one of the rare early Bill Murray comedies that hasn't particularly maintained any cultural purchase. Makepeace had his most notable star vehicle in Vamp, a movie, in my mind, most notable for having a VHS cover that everyone from that era recognized, but no one actually knew anything about. If anyone is curious, after all these years, as I was, essentially it looks like a vampire twist on Scorsese's After Hours, most notably featuring Grace Jones. Next up is Kate, who's introduced complaining about her divorced father to her mother. Like JJ, Kate also appears to be a stand-in for Jaffe herself. She complains to her mother how her intellect is intimidating to guys.
You know you have to pretend to be dumb because bright girls scare them?
She also wants to be a writer, but complains about writer's block.
I haven't really lived yet, so how can I write about things I don't know about? You would use your imagination.
This is one of many instances in the movie where the central theme of imagination is called out explicitly. But the tricky aspect of the film is that it presents imagination as a redemptive force, but also as a perilous danger that may consume the weak-minded. It's unclear whether the film is aware of this apparent contradiction, or if it is intentionally presenting this as a tension. The actress that plays Kate is Wendy Crewson, one of those actors whose IMDb page is filled with roles that often either don't have names, or have names augmented by their profession, like Prosecutor Dorothy Fredericks, or Talk Show Hostess, or Mayor Kennedy, or Allison's Mom, or, God help us, Isabella parentheses Mom, or Billy parentheses Ronnie's mom, or just Ma'am. But before you go thinking she's been pigeonholed into domesticity, don't you worry. She's also had an illustrious working career as Dr. Wiles, Dr. Jill Clavens, Dr. Dana Kinney, Dr. Fishman, Dr. Ann Packard, and Dr. Ninky Bregman.
I tell you, we're destroying our planet. They do a satire on television, and a couple of years later it comes true.
We are then introduced to our third character, Daniel, who wants to make computer games, but whose parents want him to go into software development.
What I really love is to make up games for computers.
Later, they're going to want the computer expert from MIT, not a game player from that Grant University.
Well, I think history may have actually vindicated Daniel on this one. Daniel is played by David Wysocki, who seemed to settle into a pretty decent career in daytime television, with a good run on both Days of Our Lives and General Hospital. And you know, in 2020, he had a high billing in this little flick called Gold Dust, which looks like a decently fun little indie movie. Also, it stars this guy, who looks like what would happen if you asked one of those AI art generator programs to reconstruct Robert Redford's face from the early 2000s. Yeah, you thought I was joking. This technology is not terrifying at all. So, you know, that's kind of fun. So we transition into the new school year, with JJ and Kate meeting up on campus, expressing their hopes of finding a fourth player for Mazes and Monsters.
We've got to find a fourth player.
Right, someone who doesn't flunk out or freak out.
Not like last year.
Ah, some ominous words. And finally, we are introduced to our fourth player, Robbie, whose parents...
And you've had too much to drink, again.
Right. As you might have guessed, his parents are...
I hate it when you drink.
I drink to get through the day.
Right.
I was a talented, well-educated woman.
Cat.
Well, I could have been someone.
In fact, Robbie's mother is someone who really could have been someone bigger. An eagle-eyed viewer may recognize her as Vera Miles, most well known for her role in Hitchcock's Psycho.
Mrs. Bates.
In the 1950s, Miles was reportedly being groomed to become Grace Kelly's successor, but became pregnant before she was meant to star in Vertigo, with her role going to Kim Novak. Though now seen as a classic, Vertigo was a box office disappointment. Hitchcock blamed this in part on Kim Novak, who, side note, his wife thought had fat legs that needed to be edited around. And due in part with his disappointment with the film and Novak's casting, maintained a resentment toward Miles. He did hire her for Psycho after this, but I would suggest his resentment for Miles is evident on the screen. Like TV Movie of the Week Mazes and Monsters, Hitchcock used his own TV crew to film Psycho. And yet Psycho has an indelible style and numerous creative shots, almost none of which include Vera Miles, whose scenes feel pedestrian in comparison, as if he was rushing through her scenes to avoid being around her. Despite the fact that she maintained a career afterward, it was nowhere near what she was likely capable of, had the poisonous, inky effect of Hitchcock's ire not stained her name in Hollywood circles.
Robbie, you're starting new at Grant. That means no more games. You know what it did to your marks at Tufts.
When Robbie's parents aren't arguing, he is warned to not let games distract him.
And promise me you won't play that awful game anymore.
Promise me.
Okay, I promise.
Despite playing a college student, Hanks at this point was already married and, amazingly, already father to Colin Hanks. He would have been known basically only for his short-lived, relatively unremarkable sitcom Bosom Buddies, where he would meet Rita Wilson,
I worship Satan,
who he would eventually marry in 1988 after divorcing his first wife. A year after Mazes and Monsters, in 1983, he would star in Splash with Daryl Hannah, jump-starting his leading man career. Robbie is aiming for the straight and narrow, but what do we cut to immediately? Ooh, Mazes and Monsters, eh? Sounds like a devil of a good time. JJ spots Robbie looking at the poster and tries to pilot Robbie into temptation.
Listen, you play Mazes and Monsters?
I used to, but I don't anymore.
Robbie eludes temptation, but agrees to go to JJ's party later. Robbie shows up and is introduced to Kate.
Here.
Oh.
He immediately responds to the introduction of a woman with the tact of many Mazes and Monsters players who find a woman in their midst.
You're very beautiful.
Thank you.
And then a tactical error.
Why didn't you go to class?
Extracurricular activities. I played a game called Mazes and Monsters.
You're kidding. What level?
And with that, the succubus strikes.
So am I.
Oh.
We have been looking desperately for a fourth player. This is wonderful. Just Daniel.
Before he knows it, he's introduced to the whole gang.
Wait,
Level 9.
Level 9? You didn't tell me that.
And like 1980s drug dealers offering the first hit for free, they say,
Look, please just try one campaign with us.
Yeah.
And with that, we are transported to their first game.
I am the maze controller, the god of this universe I have created.
Lit mysteriously with candles and utilizing religious imagery suggesting the dice contain totemic power. This exaggerated imagery will ironically be the closest the movie gets to representing tabletop role-playing games like D&D. Daniel acts as the dungeon master, establishing the context of the game.
It is rumored that within these mazes lives mutated people. Once human, they are now unspeakably vicious.
And with that ominous foreshadowing delivered, the scene ends with a verbalization of consent, seeming to imply just as much about the players as the characters they are playing.
Thus warned, shall ye enter?
Aye.
Let the journey begin.
This is followed by a scene that deploys the classic romantic comedy trope where Robbie clumsily spills some books as he tries to approach Kate, and she is so charmed by his physical incompetence that she can't help but engage in a romantic montage with him despite it being unclear what they have in common.
Whatever may happen.
Anything but this song.
May bend. Always remember we are all special.
That nightmarish montage finally ends, and we get a scene of Robbie revealing that he used to have an older brother, Hall, who ran away from home years ago.
He told me that he would keep in touch, but he never did.
Which will really help you fill out your 1980s movie trope bingo card. It turns out that Robbie still hasn't recovered from this.
It's funny, I dream about him a lot.
And instead of letting this speak for itself, we get the dreaded dream sequence. Is he going to blast up into a sitting position in bed, covered in sweat and desperately panting like he ran a marathon? Well, maybe not quite like I'd hoped. We then get a scene of JJ and Daniel complaining about their lots in life. JJ's sad about being a nerd, and Daniel sad about...
Everybody kids me about being the great makeout champion or something. You know what that does to any girl who's sensitive or caring?
Sounds like, in an alternate world, we could have gotten a critically acclaimed, ponderous Mike Leigh film out of Daniel's struggles. JJ has difficulty planning their next M&M session, what with the makeout king being busy and Robbie and Kate being lovebirds. So he returns to his room to discuss his depression with his bird.
Maybe I should smash my motorbike into the dorm wall. It's too ordinary. What could I do? There's gotta be the stuff that legends are made of. I want them to remember J.J. Brockway.
This paints the 80s as a quaint time where depressed kids expressed public suicidal ideation fantasies with the same doe-eyed sincerity of a kid who aspires to be the next nickel-collecting champion of Omaha.
Boy genius, suicides in caverns. They talk about it forever.
Keep in mind, this was before Americans had broad access to public mental health resources. like 4chan, to shepherd our glum kiddos into their fold of neo-Nazis and teach them that to really make an impact in this world, you need to take that self-loathing and feelings of alienation and slap down an Uno reverse card by projecting it all back onto other people that you feel like you have the power to disenfranchise with hate speech or, semi-automatic rifles.
Keep them closed.
Okay, they're closed.
All right, open them up.
Meanwhile, Robbie overplays his hand by surprising Kate with double beds.
Yeah, and you know how I feel about you. It's just that I'm not ready yet.
All right.
Also, did she just call Robbie Dan?
Yeah, and you know how I feel about you. Yeah, and you know how I feel about you. Yeah, and you know how I feel about you.
Ah, the makeout king strikes again. Finally, in nearly 30 minutes, we get our first glimpse inside the styrofoam cave. Will JJ be lost forever? Nope. However, his recklessness has seeped into his gaming decisions.
Or at the very bottom, you can see just a faint glitter. It could be a legendary treasure of the Generac, or it could be a trap.
Freelick jumps into the pit to gather the treasure. How much does Freelick get?
It's a trap.
No.
Then, much like the fantasy heroes of Mazes and Monsters, we, the audience, are treated to a faint glitter of filmmaking craft, as our director punches in close to JJ's face as he reveals his fateful idea.
I'd like to propose a new game. Kind of an evolution of Mazes and Monsters, but we'd be playing at a much more sophisticated level. In all modesty, it's the most intriguing concept of the game that I've ever heard of.
Is he just going to propose LARPing?
Something that no one else has tried.
It's just LARPing, isn't it?
I propose we play Mazes and Monsters in a real setting.
Yep, that's just LARPing.
Pequod Caverns. It's a new frontier.
No, it isn't.
It won't be a fantasy.
Let me assure you, despite the pan flute soundtrack, this is indeed ominous foreshadowing. Pequod is the name of the whaling ship of Ishmael and the gang when they hunt down the mighty white whale Moby Dick at the behest of Captain Ahab. So, what we have here is a classic trope of kinda clumsy low-budget movies. 90% of the time this is going to happen in a forest, but here we have it in a cavern. Usually it's meant to pad the runtime, but not always. So basically the idea is just showing characters wander around for a mind-numbing length of time. The combination is some Venn diagram overlap of small budget, rushed production, and directorial clumsiness. As viewers, whether we are conscious of it or not, our brains are asking us, what new information are we learning from these shots? This is why the temptation for unskilled directors is to base all scenes around dialogue, because it explicitly tells us what we're supposed to garner from the scene. But the film dictum that everyone knows is show, don't tell. But in order to do so effectively, you have to design clever and innovative ways of conveying information and creating little smaller story arcs, conflicts, and questions visually, or at the very least create compelling visual compositions. Mazes and Monsters fails on all these fronts because they simply show us what we'd expect and anticipate, and do nothing to complicate or challenge these expectations. We'd suspect that the caves are dark and dusty, and maybe slightly tricky to navigate. Within the first shot or two, our expectations are confirmed, and yet we have many more shots to go, none of which do much to inform, surprise, delight, shock, or even just be compelling. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to be cruelly unfair to poor Mazes and Monsters and contrast it with There Will Be Blood. Obviously, the two productions shouldn't be compared, but it helps to illuminate my point. The opening scene of Blood starts off without credits, and with an unexpected, almost horror movie score from Johnny Greenwood. Immediately, we the audience are thinking, what's so terrifying and apocalyptic about this wilderness? We cut to a sole man working by himself in near darkness. Anderson luxuriates the audience in the sharp, earthy sounds of the pickaxe being sharpened and the striking of the walls. The soil falling to the ground and banging against his tin bucket. He waits to reveal the year. Now the music is notably absent, but the apocalyptic tone is reinforced visually and audibly with a storm on the horizon. Back down in the hole. Is he mining for gold? In many respects, this confirms our visual imagination of what that might look like. He spits on a chunk of earth. Are we able to recognize what he recognizes in it? The edits are edits of contrast, scale, movement, light, darkness. We recognize dynamite. Now we have a small, tense story arc. Can he pull up his heavy bucket in time? The stakes are clear because we have a countdown clock in the form of a fuse. Of course, normally we don't care about buckets from the 1800s, but because we've seen how hard he's been working and by himself, we recognize this is important. Oh crap, he didn't get it in time. Will his tools be salvageable? Oh, shoot. What a great misdirection and surprise. We no longer care about his tools or whatever he was mining. With a broken leg, it's now about life or death. But wait, he still cares about what he's mining. But with a broken leg, alone in the middle of nowhere, why does he still care about that? And somehow, impossibly, he miraculously is able to snake his way back to society. This opening introduces so much about the mysteries and contradictions of Daniel Plainview. And now he's a self-made man who broke his body and yet pulled himself out of the darkness by himself. Doesn't he deserve all the wealth he gets? It's an absurdly dense scene with no dialogue in a cave that offers up even more information and more mysteries the more you rewatch it. Ideally, a scene is providing multiple things at once, all packaged in a visually interesting way. The cave scenes and mazes and monster are essentially accomplishing one thing, and the thing it accomplishes in one or two shots is the very thing we, the audience, already assumed. Eventually, we're put out of our misery.
Your maze controller is with you, unseen to your eyes. Now, let the journey begin.
Well, it's a good thing they went down the one path that JJ had set up a skeleton.
Who among us can read this strange writing?
I can. They are ancient writings of my people. I learned them as a child.
Wait, so are they pretending to not understand the language, or has Daniel literally memorized a fantasy language that JJ transcribed? I feel like the movie really doesn't have a grounding for how the logic of the game works.
Oh! Oh, I found the herbs!
No, leave the rice there, so we don't get lost.
Oh.
Why don't we split up and each of us look for the herb?
No, I don't think that's a good idea.
What's the matter, scared?
I don't understand how Daniel literally understands the real-world importance of the rice.
No, leave the rice there, so we don't get lost.
But then immediately proposes that they split up in the next line.
Why don't we split up and each of us look for the herb?
And then mocks Robbie for not wanting to split up.
What's the matter, scared?
Okay, forgive me for harping on this point, but what are the rules here? D&D is all about having flexibility to invent wild scenarios and then roll dice to level up, accumulate spells and resources, and fiddle with stats. It has a laundry list of mechanisms and rules. Doing this in a cave essentially makes all that moot. This is just spelunking. Spelunking is not a game and doesn't really have rules. Well, except for the one where you should tell people where you're going and what time you intend to return for safety purposes, which is the single rule which JJ has egregiously broken. So they split up. JJ is able to magically track 3 separate people going down 3 separate tunnels and throw his voice so that only Robbie hears him.
A monster! A monster! A monster!
And then Robbie, for some reason, hallucinates that he actually sees the monster. He really freaks out.
It is all right now. I have slain the Gorville.
Sure you have, Robbie. And what was JJ's plan if Robbie hadn't hallucinated a monster? Blindly shout down the hallway individual fight blocking instructions? Announce die rolls? It's just really incomprehensible how this game is supposed to operate.
JJ, that place is incredible!
They then all exit the cave without a single person expressing any concern or awareness that it is, in fact, troubling that their friend Robbie hallucinated fighting a giant monster.
Got these to compensate for my lack of warlike skills.
Knock it off, Robbie.
And then we get some more filmmaking magic. See if you can spot the line that may be enriched with extra thematic import.
Yes. The most frightening monsters are the ones that exist in our minds.
Did you catch it? Move out of the way, Paul Thomas Anderson. Now at home, Robbie has another dream.
I am the Great Hall. Once you gloried in killing, now you are of a higher level.
Is this the god that James Bond worships? Is 007 his D&D level?
You must be pious, humble, celibate.
Ooh, nope, scratch that Bond theory. When Robbie awakes, he has taken all this very seriously.
Anyway, I could, convince you to take a little break?
Kate, please.
Rejecting Kate's advances.
Just don't lie to me and say that you love me, but you can't touch me.
It's possible for me to love you without making love to you.
Classic sneaky Satan, harnessing the demonic power of role-playing games to encourage celibacy. Robbie's coldness pushes Kate towards Daniel, who, Lord knows, is the makeout king.
You know, you really are a lot different away from the game.
So are you. Have you noticed that Robbie's been acting a bit weird lately?
What do you mean?
I have slain the Gorville.
You haven't noticed anything?
Right.
I don't think Robbie's turning into Pardew. We work out our problems in the caverns and then we leave him there.
The movie limply attempts to suggest that each of the characters' personal problems are being addressed by the game.
What problems do you work out?
I'm trying to be me and not a copy of my father. What's the matter, scared?
While driving near the cave, Kate sees someone ride their bike toward it. You know, in True Confessions, the mostly forgotten film that came out 1 year before this one, Robert De Niro purportedly asked screenwriting super couple Joan Didion and John Gregory Dunn to add a scene where he simply enters a room alone and sits down in a chair with no dialogue. De Niro felt this added scene would permit him to express something intimate to the audience about the true nature of the character he portrayed. Just him in a chair, unburdened by dialogue. Sometimes I wonder, you think actor Wendy Crewson asked for something similar? Just 20 seconds with her and her floppy red hat? Well, so now we get another protracted cave scene. This time, Kate gets lost in the cave and shouts a bunch until Daniel finds her.
Daniel! 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 Daniel, help me! I'm lost! Daniel! Daniel! Daniel!
I think the movie believes it's providing exciting red herrings as to who will eventually get lost, as indicated by the opening scene, but watching Kate scream out Daniel's name is mostly just grating.
Kate!
Daniel eventually finds her and confesses that he was in the cave to cheat.
I was cheating. I was trying to figure out where JJ hid the treasure.
Which again, doesn't really map onto how and why people play role-playing games. Why is Daniel looking for treasure? Does he think it's real treasure? If not, why cheat? It's not like they're like live opponents in Dungeons & Dragons. It's a cooperative story game. It's not really about winning. It's about experiencing the breadth of the story as created by the Dungeon Master and thinking outside the box to problem solve a variety of tasks. But here we are.
This is only a game.
It's become a lot more for me.
Again and again, the movie fails to lock us into how any of this connects to Daniel's father or his expectations.
My father would be thrilled.
Will you tell JJ?
No, I didn't learn anything. Besides, he'd be too flattered.
You know, nothing turns women on more than confessing that you're an unrepentant cheater.
I was always like Mr. Spock from Star Trek. I thought I had no feelings like a Vulcan.
I was always afraid to get involved with you because you were so attractive.
Man, classic makeout king. While everyone else is enjoying a costume party, Robbie is compelled to begin his quest.
Now, Pardew.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now you are ready.
The gang grows suspicious when he doesn't show up to class the next day.
Robbie? Robbie can get pretty out of it, but even he wouldn't go away for the weekend and leave his door unlocked.
I mean, I talked to everybody and no one's seen him.
They phone his mom.
Hello. A drink to get through the day.
Hello, is Robbie there, please?
No, Robbie's at school.
He wasn't in class this morning, and I just wondered if he'd gone home.
Has he skipped class?
He's probably around here somewhere. Sorry to have bothered you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
They search his stuff and find his map.
He's flipped into the game.
Come on.
No, I know it. I tried to tell you. He's been acting weird lately.
They realize he's probably gone into the caverns, and so they head there to investigate.
Robbie!
After searching, they recognize that they should probably contact the authorities, but are very worried about getting into trouble for playing in the caves where they're not allowed to go. Which, would make sense if they were 12, but doesn't quite feel plausible as a big concern for college students.
Even his parents don't know where he is.
Maybe he met a young lady.
Not Robbie.
Not Robbie? And these are his friends. Savage.
Robbie was really fascinated with those caves off the Two-Lane.
Oh, you mean Pequod Caverns?
So, as is customary with a person missing for about 12 hours, they bring in their most grizzled, trench-coated detective on the case to interrogate each of the friends separately.
Mazes and monsters.
You mean the game?
You play?
Oh, I used to.
It was like the game was becoming his whole life, and sometimes he was more interested in it than me. I don't think he really realized how dangerous the game was.
Robbie a doper?
No.
What do you guys think happened?
One of the players Robbie played with got carried away and killed him. Battles, maiming, killing.
Hey, it's all imagination.
Is it?
Like in all collapsing criminal enterprises, the gang begins falling apart.
Will you look at what we have done? We've taken all the game stuff, everything from the caverns, and we have hidden it.
But JJ proposes a proactive strategy.
We could give my map of the caverns to the cops. I thought you said you hid everything.
Why is Daniel saying the word hid like he means the word destroy?
I thought you said you hid everything.
Hiding is just hiding. And 90% of the time, that means under your bed, which, incidentally, is where the map is.
But this is going to implicate us.
They propose mailing his map to the police, but JJ has a better solution. This catches us back up to where the movie started, and we get treated to repeated footage. Turns out JJ's brilliant plan is to place the map under the windshield wiper of a cop car, a tactic which will certainly lower any heat on the gang. The following day,
We've looked in the caverns. Someone even conveniently supplied us with a map of the game.
the detective gives them grim news.
We don't have idea one where Robbie Wheeling is, and I don't know if we ever will. If he's in those caverns, he's dead.
Fortunately, JJ is able to meticulously recreate Robbie's map from memory.
JJ, that is an exact duplicate of Robbie's map.
A stunt that is immediately rendered irrelevant when Kate realizes that...
The Great Hall. It's not a place, it's a person.
Yep, you didn't even see that coming, bozos. Robbie's sweaty dreams about the Great Hall are, in actuality, just metaphors for his sweaty dreams about his brother Hall. That's right, our naive boy is wandering the grimy streets of New York at night with a saucy saxophone, just filling our imagination with all sorts of lurid, jazzy insinuations. And let's be honest, wandering around 42nd Street at night in 1980s New York may have been more dangerous than being lost in an endless underground labyrinth. Instead of a minotaur at the center of it all, you're likely just gonna find a bottomless human torso, or chlamydia. Or these two guys. Sadly, Purdue appears to be afflicted with the spell of fog brain and is massively underleveled for this area.
Give me that. These are my spells. I guard them with my life. No!
But it appears he leveled up dexterity, so his evasion rolls are off the charts. Ah yes, the classic dead-end back alleys Midtown Manhattan is known for. Yeah, so this is like when the Dungeon Master scrambles behind his little screen because he realizes their once-a-month D&D night is going to be ruined within 5 minutes because a character died right out the gates, and so Robbie somehow gets like 5 saving throws because oh yeah, there's like an area enchantment we forgot to mention. Robbie sees his reflection, which brings him to his senses, and he calls Kate.
Robbie?
Kate, I'm in New York.
Are you all right? What happened?
Oh, no, I can't remember.
Where are you exactly?
There's blood on my knife. I killed somebody. I know I killed somebody.
Robbie, just tell me where you are.
So Kate tells him to go to JJ's house and wait for them there. But, like anyone else who in a moment of weakness agrees to make the hike to the Upper East Side, Robbie ultimately bails and descends into the subway tunnels. We get a good 2 minutes of boring tunnels before Robbie comes upon a homeless man.
Please, there's no reason to fear me. I am Pardieu. I am a holy man.
I'm the King of France.
Your Majesty. You tell me of the giant dragon. On my travels here, I heard him.
Dragon, you say?
Yes, the giant dragon, the one above.
Stay away from up there. They catch you and they'll throw you out.
Okay, listen, if that homeless man doesn't start furiously masturbating in the next 15 seconds, I'm calling BS on this whole movie. In the few years that I lived in New York, I only actually laid eyes on the Statue of Liberty maybe, 5 times, but the number of times I saw...
And the 2 towers?
Oh no.
Yeah, I know those.
Oh, no.
Oh, sir, I would be greatly in your debt if you could tell me the way.
Is this going where I think it's going? Meanwhile, the gang arrives at JJ's house, and JJ's mom has once again redecorated his room.
I love it. I love it.
I don't know if that's meant to be a payoff or something.
Don't you love it, Merlin?
Birds can't talk.
Oh, my mother just redecorated my room.
It's nice.
It's different.
And, well, that's the scene. The gang continues to spin their wheels until...
2 towers.
Oh, no.
Wait, not the book? Oh, where's my brain? The 2 towers are the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center.
We then are treated to a really boring chase. Likely because we already know it's inevitable that they will eventually stumble upon him, and yet they really draw it out.
Let's try the observation deck. Excuse me.
Sorry.
Excuse me, please.
Say bye? Thanks.
Just to be clear, I've obviously edited this scene down, and yet, man, it's still just so boring.
Let's go back down to the lobby.
Back down now. Oh, he's headed up.
Where can he be?
There he is. Robbie! Robbie!
Robbie!
And now they're going back up. Wait, is this the same shot we just saw? Nope, but it was clearly an alternate take since we have the same extras in the exact same order. Ah, and on the elevator we have the lady with the red hat, who was on the escalator both times. And there it is. Identical shot reused.
The door!
Just in the nick of time.
Robbie! Pardieu! What are you doing?
Going to join the Great Hall.
You can't. It's a trap.
I have spells. I'm going to fly.
Let's not. Come on.
You don't have enough points. I am the maze controller.
Maze control?
Yes. And I have absolute authority in this game.
Game?
Game.
JJ, what am I doing here? Kate, why can't I remember?
The friend you can turn to.
Oh no, not another depressing song about friendship.
Winds blow. And then you'll know.
You don't know how good it feels to be finally writing my novel.
Yeah? What's it about?
It's a surprise.
Come on, Kate, tell us.
It's about the four of us playing the game and how we conquered our fears through it.
What is she talking about? If anything, they've accumulated trauma. How did this address Kate's frustration with guys being intimidated by her intellect, or make it so JJ is fine with his mother's self-obsession, or Daniel wanting to make video games?
Well, it's about the four of us playing the game and how we conquered our fears through it. The terrible thing that happened to Robbie.
And the whole gang is okay with Kate exploiting Robbie's mental breakdown? No one has an issue with this? Okay.
It's hard to write about those feelings, but I'm not afraid anymore.
Well, I'm sure it'll be a bestseller.
Well, I'm a quiet type. I'm going to be perfectly happy as future captain of industry computer software.
So Daniel's resolution is apparently to just do what his parents want him to do.
You know, I think we're all going to be famous one day.
I'll tell you, JJ, the theater arts department is in for a real shock with you in the director's program.
Yeah, I hope so.
I only wish Robbie was coming back to school with us. But his mother says he has to keep seeing that doctor.
Ah, so they are mildly concerned about Robbie, not with just about being famous. Turns out they're actually on their way to visit Robbie now.
Hi!
Ah, good to see Robbie's mom without wine clutched in her hand midday.
I want you to know I don't blame any of you for what happened to Robbie.
You might change your tune if you knew that the gal in front of you was intending on writing an exploitative novel about your son to gain fame and fortune.
I think we're all going to be famous one day.
Robbie, hi!
So they head back and...
Freely?
Oh, for the love of...
Aren't you dead?
Hey, come on, Robbie, stop fooling around.
It is you, Freelick. You have been restored to the living.
It's nice of Robbie's mother not to tip them off that he hadn't recovered.
How's he doing?
Oh, he's fine. He's around and back, getting some air.
Okay.
I drink to get through the day.
Good job, Mom.
This lake is enchanted, and beyond there you see the great forest. Do you know of this forest?
Yes. I am the maze controller. There is a...
Kingdom of the evil Verations. Within this forest lies terrible danger. Also, a wondrous treasure.
Not to cut off this beautiful moment of the gang indulging their mentally troubled friends' delusions. Delusions, by the way, that when indulged have led to bloodshed and a suicide attempt. But it's strange to me that they initiate it by saying the one thing that snapped him out of it the first time.
I am the maze controller.
I am the maze controller.
Mazka? Maze control?
Yes. Shall ye enter?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, of course she's gonna say aye. Just trying to get more content for her novel.
Part you saw the monsters. We did not. We saw nothing but the death of hope and the loss of our friend. And so we played the game until the sun began to set and all the monsters were dead.
Dude, cold-blooded. The least you could do is visit him once a year if you're going to indulge his fantasies. Rona Jaffe wasn't the only one to write a novel with the same premise. The same year, a book entitled Hobgoblins was published with the same conceit, but with a horror slant. Much like Kate, both novels likely took inspiration from a real-life incident. What I recalled from childhood was less a hazy recollection and more an accurate memory of the haziness of the time. There were articles and 60-minute specials.
We would like an impartial inquiry by the Consumer Product Safety Commission to actually look into these deaths.
The real-life case most of the steam tunnel hysteria is based on involved, well, a child prodigy who wrote a suicide note and disappeared into the utility tunnels under Michigan State. But he wasn't lost and didn't kill himself down there. Instead, he hid for a few weeks after the attempt and sheepishly returned home. Sadly, within a year in 1980, he shot himself because of many other personal demons unrelated to Dungeons & Dragons. In many respects, Jaffe's approach with her book refocused attention away from the haze of the Satanic Panic and back onto mental health, which appears to be the true culprit. And yet, with contemporary eyes, her gesturing towards mental health feels insufficient. Yet another easy categorization to erect clean, sharp walls between the problem and the rest of us. Robbie represents an otherness that will be tolerated and indulged for the evening, and then abandoned. Our perspective of our own problems brightened in comparison to his unsolvable psychosis. 40 years later, and the Satanic Panic feels silly, but also unnervingly familiar, as greater access to information and data has not yet yielded a greater confirmation of shared facts. And though I was deprived of this smurse for fear of the threat of the devil creeping into my fertile young mind, And though I was shown comically naive focus on the family-approved movies, what stuck with me was to always think critically about what I'm watching.
Just been doing some reading up on rock music.
But more importantly, to always continue to increase my capacity for grace, to broaden my understanding of love, and to double down on hope. It's that last one that probably means I'm the naive one, and probably more like Robbie than I'd like to admit. But when I get news alerts, I'm reminded that it's quite a battle to maintain any hope, and I'm massively underleveled for this area. But then, I realize I've got my spell back. It's honestly, it's just Wellbutrin. It's filled with Wellbutrin. Thank God for Wellbutrin.
I used to lie back in my teenage bed and feel love, so much heart-busting love, just the surge of love for everything